Let's see. I am logging in on my laptop so we can answer questions. All right, yep, there we go. I think I have, let's see. I think I have the right time. Yeah. All right. I know this was kind of an odd time. Good morning, Kim. Good morning for me. Good afternoon for you. I know this is a little bit of an odd time. I am in between locations at the moment, or not in between. I'm in Palmer, Alaska, which is our technical home. And we're here for like 3 more days. And then we are back to Barrow. So I was kind of trying to figure out a time that would work in between getting things done. So this worked out good, but I know it's a little bit of might be an odd time for others to join. So before I even get going on anything, if you are tuning in later and you end up having questions about what I do today on the little tutorial, always ask questions in the comments. If you put my name in there, I will definitely more likely see it, but I will try to check back. Oh, Kim, no, I appreciate you a ton. And so I am glad I can still do this on these random occasions. But what we're doing today is a little bit different. I think what I have tried to do with our kind of coloring times is to give you guys kind of broader information versus just coloring a single image, and those are always fun to do. I am right behind you. I love going to a class where we complete a project, complete a card, but I feel like my background enables me to sometimes give you guys some more broad information that's sometimes going to help you then transfer that information onto all of your cards or multiple projects. And so someone asked a question this last month when the new pun set came out, and that's the one that just released last month, and it has the salt and pepper and the jam and peanut butter, all of those. I had done a whole series of cards, and I think I have, actually I still have all of them. I meant to send some but didn't. But what I had done with them is similar to what I did last year when the original pun set came out, is that I really just colored the image and set them up on a little white space. So all of them have the similar feel of really just being, not attempting to do a background, something really complicated, but I wanted them to not be floating in space. If I left it just sitting on that white square and just colored the little pears, it kind of floats instead of setting it on a surface by adding what's called a cast shadow. So someone had made a comment on that. In fact, it was one of our design team members that she appreciated the fact that they made sense, they added to the image, and that she wished she could do better at them. That's something I can tell you how to do. So that's what we're going to work on today, is cast shadows. So you're getting my art teacher voice today, and we're doing a little lesson about what that is and how to accomplish that on a bunch of different images and kind of some different scenarios. So I hope that's helpful. Again, if you've got questions about it after we're done or other thoughts, you are always welcome to ask. But I thought that might be helpful for some people. I don't know. Hopefully you feel that way too. All right, so I'm grabbing a pencil so I can kind of show you my thinking. Thanks, Kim. And what I used is the punny set from last year. So we have 2 of these now. So you've got all these options with fun little puns. Kim and I have had a hilarious time coming up with all of these. You can imagine our back and forth about all these different ones, and the list is endless. So that's kind of become our entertainment on the side, I think. So this first set has the corn, pears, taco, olive, pizza, slice, and egg. And then, of course, we add the little eyeballs so you can give them a little character, and then all of these fun little puns. So this came out last year, and then we have a second set this year. So you can start collecting them. What I love about them, me too, Kim, it's been really fun. What I love about them is they're simple. So if you wanted to, like the pears is a great image to try no line coloring if you want to start trying some of that. It's a simple image, simple shape. You can color it really fast and do a fun little project without a whole lot of effort. And I do like that when we end up with some stamps that are quick, easy, fun. I think those are helpful for a lot of people. So adding a cast shadow. So shadows, there's 2 different kinds of shadows that we see on an image. The darker area on an image where you shade it darker. So like on this pear, I'm going to say my light's coming down, and all of these are just going to be central top lighting. So my light's coming down from the top, just kind of right in the center. This guy has kind of a spherical bottom and then kind of cylinder neck. Those are the shapes it's built out of. But that means the highlight, or the brightest area, is going to have kind of the shape of the pear, right? That's going to be the brightest, lightest area on the pear. But because it's rounded, a soft shape, as we come away from that highlight, it gets darker and darker and darker. So you go through your middle tones and then get to your darkest out on the edge of the pear. This area down at the edge of the pear, kind of up the side, because again, we're coming over away from the highlight. This is called the shadow area of that pear. Okay. That's one way to use the word shadow. The other, though, is called a cast shadow. And that is what is actually thrown onto the ground. So when you're standing outside in the bright sunshine and you make funny shapes with your arms and your legs and your figure is cast onto the ground, that is your cast shadow. So a cast shadow is what kind of connects us down to whatever surface we're standing, sitting, resting on. So a cast shadow, especially when it's coming from straight up above, doesn't necessarily hold that shape. So it is going to sit kind of right at the base of the object. And the pears is an easy one. It can be kind of an elliptical shape that comes a little bit wider, not a whole lot, just a touch. And it has to come up so it sits up, not at this very bottom edge. If we put it underneath, they almost disconnect themselves. So we want it to be connected to the pears. So you have to come up a little bit and come out in that kind of elliptical or flattened oval shape. Now, there's a couple things we can do to get a little fancy schmancy. We could add a little more. This guy is sitting to the front, so we could add a little bump out to show that. You can add as much detail, but because we're going straight from the top, we're going to get a pretty rounded, soft shape. We don't have to get into a bunch of technical stuff to make it look like those pears are sitting on a surface. So let's do this one first, and then we'll go from there. I just wanted to show you kind of what I'm aiming for, but I don't need those pencil lines there at all. So we'll get those off. Okay, so typically cast shadows are cool. So when I'm doing them on truly just a white, good morning, Diana. When I'm doing them just on a white surface like this, I tend to reach for my cool grays. Or good afternoon, wherever you are. I should say that. It is 9 a.m. in Alaska. So, because I'm just doing this as if it's sitting kind of in a white area, I'm going to do my cool grays. I am going to start and go darkest to lightest. Again, I'm not trying to blend it with anything else. So this is more about fading out versus trying to blend it in. So I'm going to start with my darkest. And to start, I'm going to go right up against those little pears. And it's not going to end up exactly what I had, but I'll add that little bump out. And I don't need it to be super precise, but the darkest area of a cast shadow is going to be right up against the actual object. So the darkest area will be right up against those little pears. And then I'm going to add some C1. And I'm going to go right along the edge. I'll go up into the C3 just a little bit. But I'm literally extending it maybe 1/8 of an inch, maybe. Probably closer to a 1/16. Tiny, tiny amount. But that's going to start that fade for me and make the transition to my colorless blender even easier. Because literally now, because the C1 fades out so easily, I can literally run my colorless blender along the edge and I have a cast shadow. It truly is that easy. If I'm doing this just to make it sit on that white surface. So again, if I have a finished image, it's just creating more of a settled image so it's not floating in the sky. Adding that, this one with the mac and cheese, again, you can see that little hint of the shape of the objects, but for the most part, it's kind of a small shape underneath, but it's simple. And you could make it even simpler. You don't have to do that full C3, C1, colorless blender. But because the coloring of the image is also so simple, to me, taking a little extra time on that cast shadow to place it in that white space is kind of fun and an easy thing to do. So there is this kind of the down and dirty one version. Let's look at some other ones so you guys have some other ideas, because I think it's kind of fun to adjust this. If we do the taco, but what if we wanted to do a little fancier, not that I'm going to color that taco really fancy, but what if we wanted to create a little bit more dramatic shadow? We could make the light come in from one side or the other. So instead of coming straight down from the top, now all of these little images, I would just do straight down from the top. It's a little much to go that far, but for the point of education, if we wanted to add a little something and say it's coming from the side, and of course, if we're really talking about photorealism, you're talking about a 3-dimension. So is it in front, in back? Hey, Jennifer, glad to have you here as well. But for our sense, we're going to say it's kind of from the front a little bit, or from the back a little bit, and from the side. We can't really show that. My pencil's dying. But it's going to come from the side. So what happens if you stand, again, we can kind of think of that image of us standing outside in the sunshine, and maybe it's getting to the point. It's not noon anymore. The sun's not directly over our head. Now it's 6 p.m. at night or 7 p.m. and it's way over to one side. And so it's hitting us. And what happens to the shadow? It goes out away from the direction the sun is coming from. So if our sun is sitting over to the one side and hitting our taco, then our shadow is going to shoot out in the opposite direction. Again, that means it's also coming slightly from behind. So it's going to come out, and then we've got kind of that curved shape at the top of the taco. Okay, so our sun is slightly behind and to the side, and it throws it out long. So when we talk about more complicated images, and a lot of times I will tell people to kind of pick a light source from one side or the other. This is what then would happen with your cast shadows. Now, I have gotten to the point with my coloring that a lot of my coloring happens with that kind of straight down lighting, because it is, most of us, we don't see that dramatic kind of photo perfect lighting in our lives. Most of the time it's bright sunlight that's kind of that top down. It's in a room with good lighting that's top down. So, but if we want a more dramatic look to our coloring, we a lot of times will pull that light to one side or the other, give it a lot of consistency. And we would do that with another add-on of also adding that cast shadow, reinforcing where that light source is coming from. So same deal on this one though. The closer you get to the taco, the darker that shadow is. So it would come, that C3 would come right along. And this time though, it can work its way a little bit further out, right? Because that shadow's a little longer, but still that darkest area is the pool right up, tucked in tight. And this is something you can test me on. You want to fact check me the next time you think about it when you're out playing with shadows. Not that all of us do that on any regular basis, but next time you're out, either in the morning or the evening, check out what your cast shadow does just right underneath you. take a second to kind of look at what is this, you know, where is the darker area? Does it get darker as it gets closer to me, closer to my dog that I'm walking? Or is it consistent from my feet all the way out to my fingertips that are actually 10 feet away because now it's super long? So I just added the C1, extended it further. This time, because I'm making that a longer shadow, that C1 is definitely wider. It would fade kind of even further out. And this doesn't have a super specific shape to it, but you could make it very specific, kind of more straight and then curved at that top edge and give you the same kind of sense of that. So, but that's a different way to think about it and add a little bit of extra drama if you wanted to. Again, for something that's simple, I wouldn't necessarily do that, but wanted to explain it on something simple so you guys could see it. All right, I've got a couple more that I thought would be at least worth talking about. One is, and I know I have them all on these similar pieces of paper. One is the pizza. So here's the challenge. You've literally taken an object and smacked it so we're basically taking an aerial view of it. And you don't see this a whole lot in stamping unless it's something small like this. And so the other one that's in this set would be the egg. I mean, you're completely aerial view of this. You no longer are looking at it from the side. Both the pizza and the egg are like that. And so then what would you do to create a cast shadow? So on these situations, a lot of times I still don't want it floating in the sky. You can always add a background to create a surface area that it's sitting on. So you can add a color versus it just being on that white background. The other thing you can do is kind of exaggerate the idea of a cast shadow. In real life, you may or may not see the cast shadow on an object like this at all, especially if the lighting's coming from up above, because you're also looking from up above. So you wouldn't necessarily see the cast shadow, but you could give it a little bit of an exaggeration, but it has to stay really, really tight. So it just stays right up against the object. So if you wanted to, you could run that C3, and I would pick about a third to half and run it kind of around. And then because I've put it over on this kind of lower, that's my lower right hand side, I would do the same on the slice. Kind of lower right. It's almost like the thickness of the marker itself. That's about as far as I'm taking this. And notice it kind of collapses in. So it's basically the same idea. We're just keeping it really, really tight into the object. So that is what I would do. That is kind of, I think there's a lot of times in art where we take what I've talked to you guys about before, but that artistic license of, I want you to see something. And so I'm going to manipulate it so that you see it, even though it's really not there in real life. Sometimes artistically, we take that, that license of, I'm the artist. I want to show you this. I want to show you that it's sitting on a surface. You can't see that surface. So I'm going to show you that by adding that cast shadow, showing you that it's connected to something that has a cast shadow on it. So anyways, that's what I would do with something like that you're literally looking over the top. So it's very similar, but it kind of runs along one edge. You could go all the way around, but to me that adds some, it almost looks more like an outline than a cast shadow. So I tend to steer people away from that, just creating that fade all the way around an object. And that's a whole different kind of lesson in and of itself. So 2 other images, because I thought, what happens though when it's sitting on a surface? So let's do this. I forgot to pull these out, so give me a second. I'm going to pull out a couple more markers, if I can find what I'm looking for, because I didn't do this the other day. Oh, there. But these are ones I use a lot. I want that one, not that one. Okay, so what if our little olives are sitting on a wood surface? So this is not going to be pretty. Just throwing that out there. But what if this is E31? Now, I will put this out there. I tend to put my cast shadows on near, like at the end. There are people that do both ways. This is E35. And again, not pretty, but we're just creating a little wood, and it's going to bleed into my olives because I added so much ink. But you get the idea. And with wood, I tend to go in and add small amounts of one really dark. This is E25. My floor's not even level. This is very sad, or my counter butcher block. Okay, so we have 2 options. Hey, Ellie. We have 2 options when it's on a colored surface. We can do exactly what we just did and pull out our cool grays. Again, the reason we're doing cool is when something's in the shadow, whether it's in the cast shadow or in the shadow of the darker area on an object, you're going to have cooler tones. That's going to help push that area back visually, but it's also going to create that idea of that cast shadow. So I tend to use the cool grays. You could also use, though, other cool colors to create that. So this first one, though, let's stick with what we've already learned. So I can use my cool grays, but the problem is I'm working on top of color. So if I use, let's try it, see what it looks like. So if I use the C3, what's happening, and you're not going to be able to see this very well unless I get it a little closer, so I'll bring it up here. It's actually pushing the color a little bit, almost like a colorless blender, because it's almost lighter than the surface it's going onto. So C3 isn't going to work on this, and this is where having a test card with all of your colors off to the side is extremely helpful. But what I've learned already from just doing this one little piece is I'll probably have to go at least 1 notch, if not 2 notches darker. So I'm going to make this dramatic so we can see it. I'm going to go all the way to a C7 for my base color. So it's going to be dark. So I'm going to keep it in really tight, right up into that little dip in the olives. Then I'm going to use a C5 to come out a little further. Now here's the challenge. On our white, we were just fading to white, but that's not what we're doing here. We're fading into the wood, right? So I'm actually going to go back to my E31, which was the lightest wood color, and I am going to hit the edge of my gray. And I'll go into the gray just a little bit. But that is going to soften my shadow. So that is if I'm sitting on a surface. And obviously this is a little bit trickier one because of the texture. But that's going to give me that cast shadow on top of that kind of wood-like surface. And it's still going to read as sitting it down onto the top of that. And you can play around with how dark you get it, how light you keep it. Maybe you want to do like C5 and C3. So let's so if I did the C5 and then, and that might be a better, that might even be better. My concern is it still kind of pushes that color a little bit, but if I come back, you can kind of see what that would do. That gives you a little bit of an idea. So one option is sticking with that. Another option altogether, if I had, again, kind of a wood surface, let's just stick with that so we have something comparable. Let's see if I can be a little gentler with my E3-1 and not blow out my corn on the cob. All right, so we've got kind of our base color on there, and then E3-5. Wood's like the easiest thing to color if you can just loosen up and let it go. It looks more real if you do it fast versus if you're trying to like painstakingly do all the wood grain. Good morning, Melanie. Good afternoon, whichever you are at. All right. And a lot of times with wood, I go back at the end and kind of soften the whole effect anyway. So if your last step is to come back in with that lightest brown, I kind of soften a lot of this kind of striping anyway. Kind of a unique situation. So the other option with a cast shadow is darkening the surface itself gets darker, right? So in this case with the olives, we've added that cool gray to make it darker, but we could add kind of a cooler, darker brown or earth tone to create that cast shadow as well. We could do it a couple different ways. Instead of adding cool gray, we could add a different color. So we could add something like a blue violet and do something completely different, or we could look for one of the earth tones that has some cooler tones in it. So the E4s are definitely cooler than the E2s and E3s. The other one though is your E7s. So if we compare them, this is the, let's see, this is my base, which is that E3-1. This is an E7-4. And you can see this has got quite a bit. The E7s have a little bit of a mauve. Everyone says that a little bit different. And that's an E7. But we could, this is what I love about Copic, or one of the things I love about Copic, is you can blend them all. It doesn't matter that they're not in the same kind of natural blending groups. but I could literally add the cast shadow going with another earth tone that has that cooler piece to it. And I'll show you this we'll do one more because I think this is worth talking about. And I don't have another image stamp, but I can show you one more. Actually, I might have. Ooh, I do. It's from, I'm going to cheat. Can I cheat? I'm going to cheat. Okay. But I could add, because I'm working, and the earth tones are the oddballs, remember? So there's no like rhyme or reason to their numbering system, or there is, but it's not what all the rest of the colors are. So I'm going to go from those E3s and a little bit of E2. I'm going to add this E7-4, and the corn is a little bit odd too, in that it's still sitting on the table, but we see this kind of piece that comes out front. And then we also see back where it's still sitting kind of on the surface back here. And what I'm going to do with my shadow on this front little piece is I'm going to pull away. Can you see how this little section kind of pulls away? To me, what that can look like is that this is kind of curling up off the table surface. That's the fun part when you get into details with cast shadows, is you can kind of show, again, visually show your viewer what you want them to see. And I want you to see that this part of the corn is hitting this table surface and then it's curling up and off. I'm adding, so this was E7-4 in against the corn. This is E7-1, giving just a touch of fade out. And I could leave it there. You don't need to do anything else. If you end up feeling like it's got this very hard, crisp line, you could add, kind of come in with your E3-1, because we're going to soften the texture on the wood. And you could also soften the edge of that E7-1. So there is another, right? Okay, so all these different scenarios. And what I will do is I might write a couple notes on what we did, kind of that these are just the C's looking from top onto a wood with our cool grays, with other earth tones. And then the last one I wanted to talk you guys through, and obviously you could go on and on, but I'm going to use, I have stamped out some of this year's punny set, and so we're going to use one more. And of course I've got it in light pink, so it's a little hard to see. Sorry. So I've got the peanut butter and jam and my horrible stamping that ended up shifting when I was trying to stamp. So this is the one I didn't use for my card. So I have, okay, this is what I ended up with on the white. I used the cool gray. I've got the one little puddle for the jam and another little kind of puddle, my little ellipses sitting underneath my jam and my peanut butter. There might be touching, but just barely. And so you can even see a little bit of white as you see through to the other side. You can play around with that. You don't have to leave that white, but I wanted to give them a tiny bit of space. And so that we see they each have their own cast shadows kind of separately. So this is what this one ended up looking like. But what I wanted to show you guys is sometimes it's easier to pick the colors that would become your cast shadows. So for example, and we're going like ridiculously simple and straightforward so you guys can see this. If it was sitting on a blue surface, so let's say, if I can find the markers that I want, well, no, I don't want that. I don't want that. I want this. Okay, so let's say my peanut butter and jam, we have this bright blue counter in our kitchen. Which I know is completely ridiculous, but it gives you an idea of what I'm going for. And we've got no line coloring, of course, so now I'm having to be even more careful. But that's okay. It'll give you guys the idea. And you can run, so I'm stopping the countertop or the surface kind of part way up these objects. You guys could run it like all the way above. Depending on your view, you can play around with that a lot about how high that goes. Okay, but say it's sitting on this beautiful blue countertop or surface. Maybe it's a picnic blanket. Maybe we took our peanut butter and jelly to a picnic, and it's a picnic blanket. So when we create the cast shadows, we have the options that we talked about before. We could do the cool grays. Now this is already a cool color, or we could do like a blue violet. The other thing we could do, like the earth tones that we did on the corn, is we could go for kind of a darker, cooler. But how do you make blue cooler? This is where we get into fuzzy areas. We're not really getting it cooler, but we could do what's called desaturating it. Okay, so we're going to add more gray. So in all the other colors, except for the earth tones, color family wise, and the grays don't work this way either, but the earth tones don't work this way. The other color families, the reds, the yellows, the greens, the yellow greens, the blue violets, all of those, if you get that first number higher on the lid, so this is a B02, there is 0 gray in this marker. If we go up to a B45, we've added some gray. And if I go up to a B95, I've added even more. Okay, so these both value-wise, a 4.5 and a 9.5, they're actually about the same dark to light, but the 9.5 has even more gray added in. So what I would do before I color my image is that off to the side, somewhere on a scratch piece of paper, I would have colored out, oh, I'm going to use this for my countertop, this B02, and then I would come along and play with, for a cast shadow, so this is the 9.5, this is the 4.5, I'm wondering, yeah, so this is a B97, and I'm going to give little teeny tiny right underneath each one. They're each going to get their own little circle, and they're going to connect here because they are sitting super, super close. But I'm going to create these little ellipses, and this is dark, so it's going to be right up against those little objects. That's the B97. This is B95. But I can use the Copic numbering system in this case to my advantage, because I know that as I get into those higher numbers, at least that first digit on the marker, I get into a more desaturated color. And again, like the little wood surfaces we were creating. If you feel like you end up with a really harsh line at the edge, you can go back to that original kind of counter surface and hit that edge again as well. Most of these colors though, you're going to notice if you kind of go either in the same color family or that grayed down tone, you may not have to do that. You may not have to do that extra step of blending. Some of that's going to be how quickly you work. Some of it's going to be how closely you can get those colors. But to me, that's an easy way to show that. But the question had been raised kind of about cast shadows, and I felt like this was an easy time to bring that up so you guys could kind of see what I'm thinking when I'm doing those and how I do them. So that is what I have for you today. We're not actually coloring anything totally. We're talking about cast shadows and how to set things down on a surface. I know we don't have very many people here this morning, and several of you are design team members, which I love. Thank you for stopping in. Do any of you guys have questions? Because I know we have a few minutes left. I knew this wasn't going to be necessarily a full hour. Kim or Ellie or Melanie or Diane. Awesome. Okay. So again, the offer always stands. If you guys have any Copic questions or questions regarding this stuff, make sure to kind of tag me, raise your hand, give a shout out, and I will try to get it answered. I'm not as tied into the Copic world as I was 15 years ago, but I have a lot of knowledge if you guys have questions. Thank you, Kim. You're so sweet. It's what I do. This is kind of my shtick. All right. Yep. Sorry, Ellie, you kind of caught us at the end. You missed the first part talking about why we were even doing this to begin with. So I apologize. The question had come up about cast shadows, and that is what we were talking about. So if you guys come up with questions, I will add little photos with little tag information as a separate post. So you guys have that information. I will add that in here in the next few minutes. So that's a separate post. But if you guys have any questions, just kind of raise your hand. If you tag me, that makes it easier, but I do try to come back. We'll be shifting our location, I think Thursday. So I'll be kind of traveling later in the week. So I won't necessarily catch things unless you tag me, but I will come back and make sure we get questions, answers if there are questions. You guys have a great rest of your day, no matter where you're starting from, or some of you are probably even in the evening because you're on the other side of the world. Have a good one, and you guys have a great week, and I will see you guys all later.